The wind moved differently when a man was about to lose everything. Caleb Mercer had begun to notice that. By late autumn, the prairie no longer whispered, it scraped. It hissed against dry fence posts and dead grass, rattling the loose tin on the roof of his barn like a warning he couldn't afford to ignore. His cattle were thin, his well was running lower than it should, and folded inside the breast pocket of his dust-worn coat sat a bank notice stamped in red ink: 3 days until foreclosure. 3 days until owned what little remained of the Mercer ranch. Caleb drove the last nail into a broken fence rail just as the sun began to sink behind the low hills. His hands were cracked from cold and work. He wiped them on his trousers and stared across the open land that had once fed 3 generations of his family. Now it barely fed him. He didn't hear her at first. It was the horses that noticed. Inside the barn, one of the mares stomped and snorted sharply. Caleb stilled. The animals had grown nervous lately, too many riders cutting across back ranges at night, too many lantern lights flickering in places they shouldn't be. He stepped into the barn slowly, boots echoing against the hard-packed earth. The air smelled of hay and dust. Then, breathing. Not animal. Human. Caleb's hand moved to the rifle propped near the door. He lifted it carefully, eyes adjusting to the dim gold of sunset filtering through the slats. The sound came again above him. Hayloft. He climbed the ladder without a word. At the top, curled into the corner where loose straw met shadow, lay a girl. No young woman. 19 maybe. Her dark hair spilled loose over her shoulders, tangled and wind-worn. A thin wool blanket barely covered her frame. Her ankles were raw, red where leather bindings must have rubbed too long. She wasn't dressed like the town women. Her clothing carried beadwork at the collar, though torn and dirt-streaked. Native. She opened her eyes before he could speak. Not startled. Not weak. Alert. Her gaze locked on his rifle first, then his face. They stayed that way for a long, unmoving moment, 2 strangers measuring danger. You're trespassing, Caleb said quietly. Her voice, when it came, was steady despite the tremor in her body. I know. She didn't plead. Didn't cry. Didn't beg him not to turn her in. That unsettled him more than tears would have. He lowered the rifle just slightly. How long have you been here? Since the moon rose. That meant all night. He studied her again, barefoot, no saddle, no supplies, no horse outside. She hadn't come by accident. You running from someone, he asked. A flicker passed through her eyes, something sharp and old. Oh, yes. It wasn't fear that struck him. It was certainty. Caleb exhaled slowly and lowered the rifle fully. He disappeared down the ladder without another word. For a moment she thought he'd left. Then he returned with bread, a tin cup of water, and a strip of dried beef. He placed them on the wooden boards between them. You can stay tonight, he said. By sunrise you'll need to decide where you're headed. Her fingers hesitated before touching the bread, as though expecting it to be pulled away. Why? She asked softly. Why what? Why let me stay? He considered that. Because he'd seen too many men chase what they believed they owned. Because something about her bruised ankles made his stomach turn. Because the prairie had taken enough from him already. Because you look like you need sleep, he answered simply. Night fell thick and heavy. Caleb didn't return to the house. He stayed in the barn doorway, rifle across his lap, listening. Around midnight, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. More than one rider. Lantern light flickered faintly across the far ridge. Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew those patrol patterns. Men had been cutting across open land lately, claiming stray cattle, pushing boundaries, owned half the county's debt and liked to remind the other half of it. The riders passed without stopping. But they were searching. Inside the hayloft she had not slept. Near dawn she climbed down quietly. He looked up as she approached, eyes clearer now in the gray morning light. My name is, she said. He nodded once. Caleb Mercer. The silence between them felt different in daylight, less suspicious, more dangerous. They will come again, she said, closer. You sure of that? Oh, yes. He stood slowly. Who are they? Her gaze drifted toward the rising horizon. Men who believe paper makes people property. He didn't like the way that sounded. You under contract? He asked. My brother signed one they tried to collect through me. The words hung heavy. Caleb's stomach hardened. It had to be. If they find you here, he said, thinking aloud, they'll say I took you. Yes. And I can't afford trouble. She studied him carefully, reading something deeper than his words. Then she said something that stopped his breath cold. If I am your wife, they cannot claim me. The wind outside shifted. Closer now, hoofbeats again in the distance. Caleb stared at her. Marriage wasn't protection. It was permanence. And he had 3 days left before losing his land. She held his gaze without blinking. By sunrise, she whispered, they will search. The first streak of light broke over the prairie. Hoofbeats echoed nearer than before. And for the first time in years, Caleb Mercer realized the next decision he made would not just cost him land. It would define the man he was. The hoofbeats were no longer distant. They rolled across the prairie like gathering thunder, steady and deliberate. Caleb stood in the barn doorway, the rising sun cutting a pale gold line across the horizon. Beside him did not tremble. She watched the east. They won't wait long, she said quietly. Caleb's jaw tightened. 3 days until foreclosure. 3 days until could claim the Mercer ranch with a signature and a smile. Harboring a fugitive, especially one tied to, would shorten that to hours. He had lived carefully his entire life. Paid what he owed, kept his head down, fought drought and debt with stubborn silence. But something about the way she stood straight-backed, unashamed, made caution feel like cowardice. If we ride now, he said, already moving toward the saddles, we can reach town before they circle back. Her eyes sharpened. Town. Yes. He didn't explain further. There wasn't time. Within minutes they were riding hard across frost-tipped grass, road behind him steady despite exhaustion. The prairie air burned cold in his lungs. Behind them the hoofbeats split in 2 directions, search pattern. They had been right. They reached town just as the church bell struck first light. Caleb rode straight to the sheriff's office and pounded on the door. Sheriff Dalton Reeves opened it half-dressed, eyes narrowing at the sight before him. A rancher with dust in his hair and a native woman seated behind him, dignified and silent. This better not be foolishness, Mercer, the sheriff muttered. It isn't, Caleb replied, we need witnesses. Within the hour the small church was unlocked. Hale, summoned from her boarding house, stood near the front pew, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She looked from Caleb to with measured curiosity but no judgment. Is this by choice? Sheriff Reeves asked, plainly, eyes on. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Caleb swallowed once, then spoke the words that would bind him to whatever storm followed. I take her as my lawful wife. The vows were simple, no flowers, no music, just breath in cold air and the scratch of pen on paper. When it was done, the sheriff folded the document carefully. This will not stop a man like from trying, he warned quietly. It will make him think twice, Caleb replied. Met his gaze for the first time not as a stranger seeking shelter, but as his wife. Something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but alliance. Word had begun to spread. At the general store, whispers floated between sacks of flour and barrels of nails. He married her before sunrise. Won't like that. They say she ran from a contract. Hale silenced one woman with a sharp glance. A wife is a wife, she said firmly, and I saw no chains on her. Still, the town felt unsettled. Did not take insult lightly. Back at the ranch, Caleb unsaddled the horses in tense silence, stood in the yard, scanning the open fields as if measuring invisible threats. You don't owe me explanation, he said finally, but I need truth. She nodded once. My brother signed a labor contract after the army forced our people off winter land, she began. The terms were never meant to be fair, payment always delayed, debt always growing. Caleb's stomach hardened. And you? I spoke against it, her voice did not waver. Smen said the debt could be collected another way. The implication burned hot in the air between them. Caleb looked away, anger rising sharp and clean. So you ran? Yes. And they want you back to make example. She studied him carefully. They want control. If they lose me, others will see escape as possible. That was bigger than one ranch. Bigger than one marriage. Stepped closer. I did not ask you for rescue, she said softly. I asked you for protection through partnership. He met her gaze. And you have it. The words surprised them both. By late afternoon, dust rose again on the southern ridge. This time there was no searching pattern. There was purpose. Rode at the front, broad-shouldered, polished boots gleaming, dark coat immaculate despite the wind. 4 riders flanked him. He stopped just short of Caleb's fence. Well, called smoothly, I hear congratulations are in order. Caleb remained by the gate, one hand resting near his holster. She is my wife, he said evenly. His eyes flicked too, calculating. Marriage does not erase debt, he replied. Her family signed under my authority. She did not, Caleb answered. Dismounted slowly. I have documents, he continued. Proper contracts, witness signatures. If I claim interference, Mercer, you will lose more than land. Stepped forward. I signed nothing, she said clearly. Smiled thinly, a family's debt is shared. Not by law, came a firm voice behind them. Sheriff Reeves rode in from the North Road, stopping between the ranch and his men. I'd like to see those documents before threats are made, the sheriff said. His expression cooled, but only slightly. By nightfall, he said smoothly, mounting again, I will return with every paper required. He turned his horse. But understand this, Mercer, he added over his shoulder, you've placed your fragile future in very unsteady hands. The riders disappeared into gathering dusk. Silence followed. Stood still, but Caleb saw it, the tightness in her breath. He won't come back with just paper, Caleb said quietly. No, she agreed. The sun dipped low, staining the sky red. And somewhere beyond the ridge, power prepared to make its final move. Sunset bled across the prairie, painting every fence post, every tumbleweed, every shadowed ridge in deep amber. Caleb Mercer tightened the leather strap on his rifle and watched the horizon, where dust clouds heralded the return of. Behind him stood tall, unflinching, her dark hair catching the dying light. For the first time since she'd appeared in his barn, he did not feel the urge to shield her. She could stand as his equal, and she would. Arrived with 4 riders, spurs clinking, boots polished, the arrogance of wealth and power radiating from him like heat, his eyes scanned the ranch, settling on with a calculating leer. This girl belongs under my contract, he announced, voice carrying across the prairie. And you, Mercer, are in my way. Stepped forward before Caleb could respond. I am not property, she said firmly. My brother's contract was coerced. I am free by law and free by choice. Laughed a dry, cruel sound. Choice, law, you forget who rules this land. He raised a hand, signaling one of his men. Caleb moved instinctively, stepping in front of rifle ready, but he didn't fire first. He waited, measured. He knew the land, knew the shadows, knew that one wrong move could end both of them. Then came the sound of galloping from the North Road. Sheriff Dalton Reeves appeared on horseback, followed by townspeople with lanterns and pitchforks. Their arrival was quiet at first, then overwhelming. They had heard the rumors, seen the dust clouds, and come not just to watch, but to witness justice. Sheriff Reeves dismounted slowly, holding his hat to the wind. He said evenly, attempted collection through threats and violence is not law. Your contracts are flawed, your witnesses suspect. Your claim ends tonight. His face darkened, he turned to his men. Take them by force if you must. Gunfire erupted, sharp, controlled. Caleb fired warning shots, agile and decisive, pulled him to cover behind the water trough. His men hesitated under the watchful eyes of townspeople. Bullets kicked up dirt, lanterns swung in the wind. The battle was tense, precise, not chaos, but a demonstration of courage against tyranny. His arrogance faltered when a stray shot grazed his horse, sending it stumbling. Sheriff Reeves stepped in, pistol drawn. Enough! His voice carried across the field, authority unyielding. The men froze. His empire of intimidation crumbled in the eyes of witnesses. He was cuffed not by vengeance but by law and town solidarity. His defeat was a lesson, and it was witnessed by every neighbor, every skeptical resident. The wind calmed, silence reclaimed the prairie. Caleb lowered his rifle, heart pounding, stood beside him, shoulders straight, eyes steady. They breathed in unison, the adrenaline fatting into relief. Your courage saved more than me, Caleb said quietly. I didn't need saving, replied. I needed someone willing to stand with me. He studied her, realizing that the partnership she had asked for before sunrise had become real, not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of mutual trust and respect. Later, in the quiet of the barn where their story had begun, Caleb pulled the foreclosure papers from his pocket. He tossed them into the lantern flame, not because the debt was gone, but because fear no longer ruled their lives. They had faced power, law, and whispers and emerged unbroken. Weeks passed, the prairie healed with the coming of spring. Fences were mended, calves were born, taught local children beadwork and survival skills. Caleb worked beside her, not ahead, learning to share not just labor but life. And the town, they whispered as towns do, but their tone had shifted. Respect replaced speculation. Whispers carried admiration instead of suspicion. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Caleb and stood at the edge of the fence where she had once hidden, hands clasped. The town whispered about my bride that night, Caleb said softly. Smiled, tilting her head against his shoulder. By spring, they spoke her name with respect. The prairie wind swirled around them, gentle now, carrying the scent of new grass and possibility. They had survived lawless power, prejudice, and fear. And now, in that quiet, golden light, they were more than a rancher and a fugitive girl. They were partners, equals, and family. The camera of memory would always remember that night. When the prairie chose, the wind carried their story, and two people stood unafraid, hearts united, futures reclaimed. The horizon blazed with the last light of day, and for the first time in a long while, Caleb Mercer smiled freely. Not for land, not for money, not for victory, but for love, trust, and the quiet triumph of choosing each other.